All right, so in snappiness, Halictus. This is one of the most common groups. So you'll see Halictus in pretty much any collection that you do, collection event, I should say, and there'll be numerous individuals. So it's good to have the identifications nailed down in a process where you have most of that memorized so you don't have to spend a lot of time. So we'll start, well, here's the list of species we're going to cover. So Halictus confusus and its newly introduced cousin, Halictus tectus, and a Western cousin, Halictus tripartitus, which is unbelievably abundant out west, but is now sneaking in, or at least we're now become aware of it in states along the Mississippi. So it's worth looking at that to be aware that you might be picking that up in some of the western areas. We'll then look at the brown species, so rubicundus, ligatus, and its cousin poeyi, parallelus, and did I mention rubicundus? Did I? I think I did. So those groups. So let's start with the green metallic bees, and these often get confused. Oh, I'm going to share my screen. These, particularly Halictus confusus, which is the most abundant bee to be found in that group in the east, is often ends up as a dialectus in when people are sorting or morphosorting. And sometimes you spend an awful lot of time thinking it's a dialectus and trying to key it out with a dialectus key. Hang on for a second, and screen. And it turns out that it's all along it was Halictus. So the vibe, the metallic nature of it is, there's my email. All right, doing two things at once, not my skill set. Let's get rid of that, get rid of that. So here's Halictus confusus. You have strong outer veins. In lazy glossum, they're going to be weakened and different kinds of patterns. You have a hairband. This is a good example of not the best of hairbands. So there's a hairband on the tergites, on the rim of the tergites, and you can see this specimen here is old, elderly. The edge of the wings are ripped up. This gal has seen a lot of action. Those have hit vegetation, hit the ground as it goes back and forth. And particularly the middle part, which is more likely to scrape against a tunnel or something else, the hairs have rubbed off along the rim, but the hairband is still apparent at the sides. And this is something to always be aware of in any specimen of bee, is that an old bee, which will have a ragged edge to the wing, is likely to have lost hairs, particularly on the abdomen, that may not 100% match some of the descriptions in the guides. The other thing to note is you can see here, let's see if I can get the white balance a little bit better. You can see a greenish metallic reflective cast to this that would match any number of Dialectus group lazy glossum species, and the size is about the same. So if this were the only one in the east, this would be fine, but it's not now. In the eastern urban areas, particularly in highly disturbed, very impacted playgrounds, we find them, and in brown fields and the middle of cities. In fact, the very first one was found in the very middle of Philadelphia in a traffic circle, is Halictus tectus, and we're going to bring up the differences between those two. And then we're going to bring up the differences with the other green bee that's coming from the west, or green Sidonia group of Halictus tripartitus. And talk about the subtleties, and that one is important to note. So I want you, so if you determine that it's Halictus and it's green, 99% of the time in the east, it's going to be Halictus confusus without a whole lot of problem. But you should have in the back of your mind that perhaps you should be aware of some of these other groups. Now I want you to look at two things here. One is that in general, the areas that are not the hair bands are not covered in other hair. Okay, so there might be minute amounts of hair. You can see a little bit of thin hair throughout there, but it's certainly not covered by hair, and you wouldn't notice it if you're just describing that. And the other is, move the specimen down here, and so that's how you're going to tell it from Halictus tectus as a quick and dirty. There's other characters, but the hairy abdomenness or lack of is the way to do it. Confusus has a lack of. And in terms of tripartitus, which is a trickier trick to tell apart from Confusus, two things are going to be important. One is that the propodial triangle area here has no clear pattern to the raised areas. You can see this area is, you could call it rugose, or you could call it rugulos if you want to use those kinds of terms, but it's just busy with raised lines. But those, maybe here there a few are parallel, but it's largely just, what do they call that? Anastomatized. It's just busy with that. So that's very characteristic. And it's also, I think, if I remember right, I could be wrong, we'll see with the Halictus tripartitus, it's relatively long. You can use the metanotum above it as a measure, but I believe relatively long is a character. It's been a while since I've had to look at a bunch of those. The other character difference with tripartitus has to do with the head, and in particular, we want to look at the supraclipial area. So the supraclipial area here, a little bit shiny. Let's see if I can maybe fox this. So when we talk about the supraclipial area, we need to above the clipius. So here's the clipius. These are the suture lines that define the clipius. Let me zoom in as much as I can. And then above the clipius is the supraclipial area, which is defined by the border of the clipius and then suture lines coming down from the inside of the antennal sockets here. And what I want you to notice is that if you took this line, which is the line between the suture lines that go along the lateral sides of the supraclipial area, between that line along the clipius, and you took that as a rough measure, it would roughly be the same length as from here to here. So what you're going to see compared to tripartitus is it's a little bit longer. It also has, this looks fairly well pitted, and it is, but tripartitus has even more pits, but it will be shorter. So let's jump to tripartitus now and take a look at that, and then we'll come back and look at males of Confusus. So tripartitus is here, and I only sadly have the female of tripartitus. So the first thing we'll do is, well, since we were just
Sam, can you remind the class what that was kind of confusing. What species did you just have under the microscope?
I had the word confusing is apropos here. It's Halictus. That was Halictus confusus. And yes, please keep right. I'm not looking at the. Why can't I get something in here? I'm not looking at the chat, but Claire is, and she'll be your advocate for things that need more clarification that I might be saying that are confusing. So now we are looking at Halictus tripartitus. It's also a test of whether you're paying attention. And in a very, very broad way, it's a little bit smaller, but not a whole lot. But if you have tons of specimens and you have one or two of the other species, they're either they might stand out as like, oh, that one's a little bit bigger, I wonder why, and that's a little bit smaller, I wonder why. So I'm going to see if I can get the light to change here. Apparently not. Nope. Okay, so we're going to look now at the clypeus and supraclypeus area again. So here's the clypeus. There's the suture line, which is sort of visible. And here is the supraclypeus, the area above, between the antennal sockets and below. And I'm at high power. You can see just from being on high power in both that I can't get as much of the head in because it's smaller. But if we look at the boundary, and let me get some light in here in some slightly different areas. But if we look at this boundary of the clypeus, supraclypeus, here to here, and then we turn it up in our minds, or you, if you had a measuring reticle, you could see this. If you turn that up, you'd see that while not the best of characters in terms of it's still a little subtle, you can see that this line here is longer than this to this suture line, or reversing that, this suture line is shorter than the distance between the suture lines along the clypeal edge. If you look at, and again, these can be unbelievably abundant. You get into the Dakotas and you're going to get both species and you're going to have to tell them apart. But after looking at many, you'll get the general vibe of that. There's not much else to go on except for the propodial triangle. And let's see if I can get that in picture here. And it has a different pattern than confusus. Let me get the power down. Hopefully we will get that in view. And again, one of these things that you need, this is why you need reference collections, right? Is you need to see it. But look at this. So if you recall the other one, they both have the propodial triangle here is relative, has lots of raised sections. But in the tripartitus specimen that you see here, and is true for pretty much all of them, you will see that there, while there is busyness, there is a, let's call it a tendency or a overall pattern to have what we would call striations that are running down through there. It's not great, right? So, but you can see pattern in that, right? Whereas in the other one, this was all just this mass of anastomized, I have to learn that term, crazy raised areas with no linearity to the pattern. But here there is this linearity. So again, you can see why seeing specimens would be important, because how do I describe that? If you looked at only a tripartitus specimen, you might say, well, that's pretty much without any pattern. But in comparison, it does have this striate pattern there. Play around a little bit with the lighting and you can see how the pattern kind of gets exposed. Additionally, while not completely obvious, and perhaps if we looked at the scutellum difference, which I'm not going to do now, but you can take that as homework. This distance between here, I believe, is relatively shorter than in confusus. Someone else could pipe in. Anyone else, because these are specimens that species that people have tons of experience with, because there are tons of them in almost any collection. If anyone else wants to add anything, just drop that into the chat and Claire will bring that up. I'm now going to put this back in the proper box, and I'm going to pull out a Halictus confusus male. So males of Halictus in general have a vague reflection of the hairs along the rim of the tergites, but they're not as banded. So sometimes, and then as you've seen in specimens of Lasioglossum, the weak venation is often, so here's a good shot of the venation while we're at it. So these, the thickness, comparative thickness of that, and that are all roughly the same. However, in Dialictus, which would be the group that you would have to struggle with as to whether it's a Dialictus or a male Dialictus or not, these would be weakened, but less so than even the female, and meaning that they would be skinnier, often defined by a single line, but it's an experience thing, because sometimes you're second guessing on that. And you can see here, there is some vagueness that there might be a hairband, but again, it's not like the female. The female hairband is very strong, very obvious, so you're left without a lot of confidence in that character. You can see it's not about wear. This edge of this wing is entire, so this is a fresh male. But a good character is, first of all, the head is has yellow on it.
Sam, I'm going to interrupt you for a quick second.
Sure.
Going back to the females, the abdominal hair, lack of hair. Can you explain that distinguishing characteristic again?
Yeah.
Which one had which?
Head width?
Which one had which?
Oh, so Lasioglossum has hairs that come out of that are.
No, I think we were talking about confusus versus tripartitus.
Oh, hair bands are exactly the same in females.
You said something about the abdomen. Would the guest who asked the question like to unmute and clarify?
Hi. Yeah. You had mentioned, I think, the difference between tectus and confusus was the hair or lack of hair on the abdominal bands.
Yes.
Was there another characteristic, or is that the only one?
That's the best one, and I have tectus specimens, so we're going to see that, and you'll see it's sort of a dynamite character, unlike tripartitus versus confusus.
Okay, great, thanks.
So yeah, coming up. But I just wanted you to remember that there was pretty sparse hair everywhere on a female Halictus except for the hairband. Difference between hairbands on Lasioglossum and Halictus, and you can go back to our earlier talks on this, is hairband is at the edge of the rim and very uniform, unless it's worn, on Halictus. And and mostly there's not, if there is any kind of hairband in Lasioglossum, it's either going to be extraordinarily sparse and therefore like ambiguous, sort of like the male we just saw, or the hair band is actually coming from the base of the tergite and often is lapped over by the bare rim of the previous tergite. So it's a basal versus rim hairband, and because of the way things are positioned and because tergites are often have clear rims, you have to kind of look until you get familiar with the character, because they look like they're basically in the same place, but one is coming out from under the tergite because it's on the base physically, and another Halictus is actually on the rim of the tergite. So on this male, as is all the male specimens of Halictus, there is yellow on the rim. However, a number of the Halictus, I mean the Lasioglossum dialectus group do have some yellow on the rim too, so it's not absolute, but if you see a lack of yellow, you know it's not a Halictus. I also want you to note here that the color of the hair in Halictus, confusus, and tripartitus is sort of a dirty yellow, light brown, off-white kind of thing. And we'll see with Halictus tectus, which I'll show in a second, that it's bright yellow. Or no, bright white, sorry. So I want to show you a good character that should alert you to, oh, I've got a Halictus thing here that's not mentioned very much, but works. Like if you're second guessing and stuff, you should look at the legs, and here it is on the middle tarsus, and here is the hind tarsus. I'm going to flip it over. It might be easier to see. And what you're going to see is in both Dialectus and in Halictus, you can get quite a bit of yellow on the legs. And in Dialectus, in identification of males, it's often useful as to whether it's there or not. But what you see in Halictus is this pattern where there's a central brown patch surrounded by yellow, or more or less surrounded by yellow. If you turn the specimen, you should see it over there on the tibia. So, and we'll try and confirm this with the others that we'll see today. So this brown middle patch, rather than it being brown in the, so in a lot of the Dialectus, for example, the whole center of the segment is brown, and there's yellow on the apical and basal ends, or some other combination. You almost never get this sort of, oh, here's a brown patch on what is a yellow field, or pale yellow, which is a good confusus, not confusus, a good Halictus male eyeball character. So we're now going to move to tectus, which is this, I think it was first found in 2008 in Philadelphia. And let me pull that specimen. And now should be looked for in any area, particularly any urban area, because these urban bees get transported pretty frequently. So be aware, but it'll look different, or should, unless you're thinking that such things don't exist. So these distributions are bound to expand perhaps throughout the whole country for this kind of species, I think. I believe it's pretty common in Europe. All right, so we are looking at Halictus tectus. It may not show super well here, but it has the same basal coloration to the integument, which is a sort of olive metallic green dialectus-y looking thing. It's not showing super well here, but I think we'll look at a couple other shots. But what you should notice is there is tons of hair all over the place. This is a worn specimen, so old, so some hairs have worn off, but mostly these species have hair all throughout, and bright white hair all throughout the abdomen. Oops, there we go. And so it really shows up as a very bright looking thing. In fact, visually, when I was collecting it, I saw these things and I would just notice the whiteness as they were flying around close to the ground in this trashy area. And I was like, what is that? And indeed, you can see this compared to the other bees that might be in the area in the east pretty easily. Now, elsewhere, so the abdomen, it's most noticeable, but there is a general pattern in Halictus tectus of more than normal amounts of white hair in the thorax and even on a bit on the head here. but it's more difficult to sort of quantify. So recall these other specimens, and you would see more of this this sort of yellowish, brownish, light brownish hairs. And here it's bright white. This is not a great specimen. You know, it's dirty, but aren't they all? And then here on the head, lots of bright white hairs too, not throughout, but it's really on the abdomen that it's most noticeable. So let's look at the propodial. So that alone works. What's the propodial triangle look like here on this one? Just out of curiosity. So go into urban areas and find weird specimens like this. There's a lot of other things. Ooh, it does look quite different. Scutum, scutellum, metanotum, propodial triangle looks really different. So you look at all the pitting that's coming onto the triangle and just some small striations. So we could use that character too as ID thing. I'm trying to get in there. But yeah, looks quite different. I believe I have a male pulled here. I think it lacks its head, but we'll find out. It does lack its head. I don't have a in the Discover Life guide, which I did not look up beforehand. We have some Discover Life problems today with a new server iteration not liking some of the characters we used in there. So, but I think they're usable, but I have some reservations about a couple of the guides at the moment. Hopefully that'll be fixed. So if you look at this, you can see, again, recall that in the male of Confusus, there was almost no hair on the abdomen at all. And here's quite a bit of this white hair business. And I don't have a shot of the head. And Discover Life Guide may give you some more ID tricks for the males of Tectus. But again, it's this hair thing is what I use, and it's just such a giveaway. The propodial triangle may also have some characters. Let's see if we have the similar Halictus leg thing. This is a European bee of origin, but let's see if it also has our hind leg brown splotch. It's not quite the right angle for seeing things there. And well, I'm not sure. So it's certainly brown in the middle. I don't see, I would have expected elsewhere, if it were the classic, that this would be surrounded by, or at least on one side, and then when you translated it throughout the whole segment on all sides, it would be a spot rather than brown in the middle kind of thing. Let's rotate it a little, see if we do see anything on that thing. So that character maybe only, I talked about for legs, may only be a North American character. We're looking here again, and yeah, it looks like perhaps it's all brown in the middle. So much more like a Dialectus. So it's possible that Tectus would get lumped because of that more often into the Dialectus tribe, but it would have the all strong veins. But as we mentioned in male Dialectus, strong veins, weakened veins are present, but more subtly so than in the females. So there we go, strong veins, check that. That takes care of our green bee tribes. So I'm going to move to the brown bee. So if we have any green bee questions, now would be a good time to ask about them. All right, so let's jump to the most common group, which is Halictus ligatus, and poeyi. So a while back, quite a long time ago, Lawrence Packer and a student, but I can't recall the student now, worked out details that determined that there was more than one Halictus ligatus type of thing. So Halictus ligatus was on the books. Halictus poeyi was a Caribbean species that looked similar but had been given a different name. And it turns out that this thing called poeyi was hanging out in the south. And they did what is it called? What's the primitive molecular technique where you have bands of highly toxic chemicals that look at differences? I can't remember. They're quite different. And in the south was poeyi, in the north was ligatus. They had a bunch of specimens, but not like like super ton. And they, I think, maybe got up into Virginia where they found that both poeyi and ligatus. So ligatus to the north, poeyi to the south. I think, though, that poeyi probably runs all the way up in sand areas, maybe even up to Cape Cod. So first of all, but in that paper, they said morphologically indistinguishable. I'm going to show you a couple things that I think indicate a difference between poeyi and ligatus. And I will just whine right now that I cannot get anyone to look at the molecular stuff and get that back to me successfully over many years of trying.
Sam,
in any case, yes.
I'm sorry, I was having a Teams issue when you were switching. We do have questions about the metallic ones. I just was unable to click anything. So do female Dialictus have the same yellow-brown leg markings as you were describing there?
So the answer would be no. They don't ever, as far as I know, have the yellow-brown spot markings that the North American Halictus have, but apparently not the Halictus tectus, which is European but introduced into North America. They have yellow, they can have extensive yellow, but it's apical and basal on the tibia, with the center of the tibia being brown. And there might be a few cases where the amount of yellow is entire, where the tibia is entirely yellow in some southern species, but mostly you have some yellow, brown, yellow thing going on. And the Halictus group has yellow, brown, yellow, but the brown is actually a large oblong spot or blob that has yellow surrounding it on the segment, if that makes sense.
Let you know if there's more questions. There was another one about those, though. Is there a way to tell male Halictus ligatus from a male Halictus tectus? For example, does tectus have long suberect hairs on metasomal sternite 2 and 3?
I don't know anything about sternite characters, but ligatus can be told from tectus and the other Sidonia things, confusus and tripartitus, because they have, as you can see here, they have a brown integument with no metallic undertones whatsoever. And the other three that we've covered have a greenish metallic nature to them. So that would separate them. And also, they are, is that true? Yeah, they're all smaller than Halictus ligatus, which would be the smallest of the four we're gonna talk about. Okay, any more green bee questions?
That was it so far.
Okay, so ligatus and poeyi have this very distinct feature on their heads. First of all, their heads are quite wide in comparison to parallelus and rubicundus, but they also have this pulled out area, which I'm going to try and emphasize by moving my mark and changing the shadows here with the thing. But what you see is a part of the integument that forms a projection, a peninsula. You have to almost always turn the head at least sideways, sometimes all the way upside down. This can be quite large, or it can be relatively small. It's as if the entire cheek were made of clay and you pinched a tiny bit and pulled it a little bit. That's the type of projection. So in the direction that we're not looking at, it's narrow. So this is flattened in this dimension and pulled down. It would seem like. So that's always there. You have to turn it over and pay attention. And additionally, the vibe within your collection box would be a very wide-headed Halictus. So so that separates it from rubicundus. Those two from rubicundus and parallelus. But it leaves you like, well, what am I looking at? Is it Halictus, ligatus, and poeyi? And so in the mid-Atlantic area right now, until I can confirm the differences here, I almost always call it ligatus / poeyi, even though the original paper does not identify them this far to the north. I think poeyi is up here. So to be safe, I call it ligatus / poeyi. After the fact, when we get a little more molecular data or we confirm my suspicions on separating the females. I have no way to tell the males apart, at least that I can tell right now. But when I took specimens from very far to the south, like Florida, and compared them to very far to the north, like Vermont, I felt like I was, clearly looking at the two different species. And the thing that I noticed, I'm going to change the specimen's angle here a little bit, that I think may be useful, but again, we'll call this unfounded or unproven, but something to think about. And I would love to have someone do this molecularly if you're looking for a small, easy project. So if we look at the suture line, like we were doing last time, between the sutures coming down along the supraclypeus to the clypeus, and between those two, so the supraclypeal boundary there, and compare that to this. So here's the clypeus, it's running down like this, but then it angles way over, and it's still part of the clypeus here. So if we compare this as our measure to the eye, which is basically the clypeus runs all that way, they're about the same. So this length of suture and this length of suture, showing a relatively wider head, and then in ligatus. So in ligatus, I believe you should not use this because, again, haven't proven that this line here is longer than this line to this line. And to fake prove that, I'm going to pull another specimen out that is from, I believe, the north. Rubicundus, parallelus, ligatus. Here we go. This is from Massachusetts. There's also different generational things. So you have, I believe, what are overwintering F1 females, and they tend to be bigger. And so the proportions, though, I think are the same, but, all needs to be confirmed. Lawrence seems to think that I'm just looking at F1s versus not F1s. I think not. So we should lay some money on it, but we haven't. So we got some antenna in the way things here. Let me move this a little bit. All right, so here, zoom in here. So size is problematic, but in general, the ligatus is on average smaller, but again, you have these large females that come out in the spring versus smaller ones. Okay, And then poeyi is I think average is larger. So here we have a more up close view of the same sort of thing. And there may be other differences. I spent a bunch of time over a couple of days trying to figure out differences, and this is all I could come up with. So this line here is larger than this line. That's a pit right there, prepodial pit, that line to that line in ligatus. That's all I got. I want you guys to prove it, who have molecular things. If we look at the back, easy to identify group because of the little, I guess it's the ligature. Is that a ligature? Thus the name ligatus, but maybe not.
Sam,
so, yeah.
Can you say that one more time clearly? Poeyi like this, ligatus like this.
Poeyi.
In your, I think that this is what it looks like kind of thing.
Yeah. I can only do female differences, or I have a conjectured difference. So poeyi, you're going to compare the, well, in both. You're comparing the boundary between the supraclypeus and the clypeus to the lateral edges of the clypeus after the angle occurs, and I think it's tentorial pit that's there. So you have two segments that are easy enough to isolate and identify. And in poeyi, the two are about equal, and or possibly even the lateral segment of the lateral suture line is longer. In ligatus, the boundary between the supraclypeus and the clypeus is clearly longer. So that needs to be proven. I'm just throwing that out there so you can start looking for these kinds of things. I also think poeyi is a lover of sand, much more than ligatus, but that remains to be proven too. I just want to show nice clean bands, a little worn in the middle there for another Halictus. We're going to now show a female. Let me put this in the right place. A male, rather. And the male is, where is that male? Who's this here? Rubicundus. Is this the male? No. I had a male out here. Pretty sure. There's a lot of boxes running around. Ligatus, parallelus, rubicundus. This be it? It is. Okay. So in the male, let's go for our inspection of the leg character. That I think is a good general one for Halictus as a group. So this is from far away, but there's a brown spot on that side. Let's angle this a little bit differently and zoom in there. It's the outer edge of it. Oops. Sometimes the middle legs have it too. I'm not sure. I haven't paid enough attention to find that. The spot is being hidden by the pin, it looks like. Let me see if I can take the label off and flip it. We have time at the end, I can pull another specimen. This one is unproductive. in leg spotting. Oh, it looks like the hind leg. Is that the hind leg? Might be broken. All right, I'll have to try and find a better specimen here, but I'm not even 100% sure if I'm looking at the hind leg or not. But you can see amidst these legs, these brown spots here and here. You can look, I mean, all of you have these specimens, so check them out. So in the male of Halictus, ligatus, and poeyi, they have no cheek projection. In fact, I don't see anything on the cheeks that are even modified a little bit to use as an ID separation, unlike the females, which brings up the question is, why do the females have that? Instead, though, they have a nice boundary between the upper and lower parts of the antenna. So this one's cocked a little bit. This is the upper part. So the upper part is dark and the under part is yellow, relatively bright yellow. I'm going to try and flip this a little bit another direction, see if we can get a better shot of the yellowness of the antenna. And that's going to be a character for separating ligatus from the other two, particularly rubicundus. So you can see here that the underside of the antenna is really clearly yellow and not subtly lighter, but just plain old yellow. So that's the main character. If we look at the clypeus, you'll see the yellow on the edge of the clypeus, and compared to the parallelus, you don't see a strong projecting middle segment of yellow, which we'll see in parallelus, which is bigger anyway and has darker wings. You can see also that the, oops, I believe, what is the difference here? There's a difference, I think, between the distance of the ocelli here and the distance to the vertex is much longer. So the vertex distance here is much longer in parallelus. I think I have that right. But the yellow antennae are such a lovely character that I almost never have to look at anything else for the ligatus poeyi group. So now, if we go to rubicundus, which tends to be the species most often confused with ligatus in the male. So the female, pretty straightforward, and then the females can be often confused or are at times confused with parallelus. These are relatively big specimens, but parallelus is much bigger. Rubicundus averages larger than Halictus, ligatus, and poeyi also. Get this right in here. Oops, did not get a well-behaved piece of clay on this one. Okay, you can see even from here, well-formed bands. We won't turn it over, but the head does not have the ligature. It is also not unusually large. This looks like the vibe would be, oh, I'm looking at something in Halictus. Is it a Halictus or is it a dialictus? And then, oh, I see the hair bands at the rims make it Halictus. I can see the strong veins also backs that up. I see the lack of a projection under the cheek, which we can't actually see, and I see a head that's not unusually wide. And now I'm going to shift, and also the wings are a little bit yellow. In other words, they could call that infumate or slightly infumate or slightly colored. You can see here, but you'll see that in So I'm going to do the wings. So there it is, mostly kind of a dirty, dirty window look to it. But in parallelus, it's going to be much more obvious. And then there is a Selly measurement that will also help us separate this species from parallelus. Sometimes when you just get one or two of each of these, you can get confused between the two, parallelus and rubicundus. So I can't remember now whether what's this, is it this distance between the outer parts and the eye, or the outer parts and the back of the head, but whatever it is, smaller and rubicundus. Let's take a look at a female parallelus, and we'll circle back to the males in a second. Oops, I want to finish this before our host nips us out.
Well, I'll just have to stop the recording. Y'all can still hang out.
Okay. Right.
While you're looking at that, in Spain, male ligatus is distinguished, Spain and Oregon, I should say, is distinguished from other male Halictus based on the length of hairs on S2 and S3.
Uh-huh. So is that, did you say Spain or Oregon?
Well, somebody said from Spain, Rachel said from Spain, and then Jessica said that they use that in Oregon as well. Okay.
Does that only in the green Halictus groups, or is it also work in the, all the Halictus, including the brown ones?
Great question that somebody should unmute and address.
While you're doing that, you can see these wings, and this is parallelus, are a bit darker. It's also subtle, right? So it's difficult unless you're doing direct comparisons, because you might say, well, that rubicundus is dark-ish. So I find sometimes when people talk about slightly darkened wings, for example, in Agaposmin splendens, that, okay, if it's the only bee, you might have trouble because you can't get the measurements, the comparisons there. But when you have a big collection, it's less of a problem. Okay, so here are the...
Wait, Sam, somebody was unmuted to answer your
go ahead.
question to their question.
Got it.
Sorry, yes, for Oregon, we have 6 species of Halictus, brown and the metallic ones, and that's the key we have, is using the long hairs on the 2 sternites for ligatus, for male ligatus.
Okay, so separating male ligatus from all the other Halictus, or just dilator?
Yeah. We have confusus, tripartitus, rubicundus, farinosus, and there's one on the coast, vergitellus, I think.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, the keys out those 6 species of male.
Okay. And I think Discover Life guides also go all the way to the west for Halictus in general. But I did not know that character, so I'll have to play around with that too.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry. If you look at the website I added, I just looked it up because it's in Spain, and yeah, that's what they say. It doesn't say, it just says to distinguish it from other male Halictus in Spain. That's what they use.
Okay, and when you're talking about that one, are you talking about tectus, or which in Spain, which Halictus are you talking about?
Ligatus.
Oh, they have ligatus there?
Yeah.
Oh, as an introduced species or same species, or we don't know?
I don't know. It's on your Discover Life. It's shown in Spain.
Okay.
And I looked it up on Spain.iNaturalist, and it says the males of ligatus are distinguished from other males. Let me find it. Males are easily distinguished from other males by the presence of long suberect hairs on the 2nd and 3rd metasomal sterna.
Okay, so maybe it's a ligatus only character, or at least in Spain, and then elsewhere we may have. So this is worthy of some investigation.
Although Discover Life mentions it for the UK, and I don't think we have it in the UK.
Do we mention ligatus as a showing on a map or something?
Yeah, you do for the UK.
I wonder, yeah, you can click on the record and see where it came from, because in all these like GBIF and Discover Life, there are errors where, you know, so if it says, like, it might show in UK and then it might be for, you know, Georgia or something.
Yeah, it says Wales, but I don't know of it here, and it's not on our BWAR's website or in the books that I have.
All right, yeah, might be worthy of checking out where that that specimen came from. But yeah, everyone should take all these outliers with grains of salt. We see this all the time. Okay, before we have to go, parallelus. Here, this distance, either internally or externally, I'm not sure which, very clearly in either case, this is shorter than this distance to the eye and distance to the back of the head. And in Discover Life, it says what it is, but I can't recall what the exact measurement should be in parallelus. But it is just a big, when you look at them, it's like, oh, that is really big. But of course, if you only have one rubicundus or one parallelus, you can sometimes end up second guessing yourself. If we shift now to the males, I'm going back to rubicundus, and I'll show you quickly that the males have antennae that are basically all dark. Oops. And that would be at least how I had done it in the past. Now we have all this interesting possibilities with looking at characters under the sternites, which I completely have ignored. But it's a very dark antenna. Yellow does not have the projecting part there, and dirty hairs. And then if we look on the undersides too, it's equally dark all ways round on that antenna. And particularly in comparison to the ligatus poeyi clan, very clearly different from that. So that's a really good way to tell that apart. If we look now at our last thing to look at, which is the male parallelus. What did I do with the box? Parallelus, I have one pulled. I'm under a lot of pressure here, but how could I have moved it somewhere? It was, there's tectus, tripartitus, ligatus, poeyi, confusus, rubicundus. Oh, it's over here. And we have, again, large size, dark antenna, wings are infumate, if you will, or slightly darkened. And we have a nice, well, let's see if we have the leg thing going on there too. It's not in the guide, but there's our dark spot in the leg there too, saying, oh, that's probably Halictus. And then if we look here on the face, oh my God, it's 2 o'clock. Claire will let us have 1 second longer.
You have another couple minutes.
Okay.
My class is also recorded. I'll be okay.
Oh, okay, good. So here's much more extensive yellow, and you can also see this interesting pattern to white, which is hard to describe, but you have this projecting central area of yellow moving up towards the top. These antennae are busted. I believe, I'm not sure what the color underneath are. The implication here is that maybe there are smudgy yellow, so between rubicundus and ligatus in terms of male architecture, but size plus, and again, I have to look, I didn't look at Discover Life, so I don't know if the vertex is also useful in the males, but I usually look at these other features. But it could be that the same vertex measurements here and these distances to eye and to back of head go. That should be in the guide. I think we are done. I don't know if Claire will allow us to have a question or two.
I don't have anything in the chat, but you're welcome to unmute. Are all Halictus like Lacioglossum in that many more females than males are found due to females being already mated when they emerge?
I think that is true, that they're mated when they emerge. And so in the spring, it would be almost entirely a female pattern. I haven't looked at the numbers though. And then as you get into the fall, you still, and this is true kind of across the board for all the groups, you're still getting mostly females, but you do start cropping up with males. And every once in a while you get into some big pulse of males at a particular site and location, and it may be just random. But yeah, there'll always be more females than males in a large collection.
Anybody else?
We should all be looking at sternites and looking for Halictus tectus in cities as homework.
Do they have multiple emergences / generations throughout the year?
I hope someone else will pipe up about this, but my general feel is that these are eusocial groups and that the mother may share a nest structure with multiple daughters, things like that. But I'm not an expert on it.
Okie dokie. I'm going to end the recording now. And but I'll leave the room open if you guys still want to chat.
Thanks, Claire. Have fun.